There exists a profound moment in every person's journey, a quiet reckoning that arrives without fanfare or preparation. You find yourself standing before a mirror, not seeing your reflection, but feeling the invisible burden that has shaped your shoulders for years. It's a weight you never consciously agreed to shoulder, a heaviness that settled into your bones before you had words to name it. This burden carries stories that began long before your first breath, narratives written in the language of silence, expectation, and inherited fear. Yet somehow, through the mysterious alchemy of childhood, these stories became yours to complete. They wove themselves into the fabric of who you are, creating patterns you mistake for personality and limitations you accept as truth. Perhaps you spent years avoiding this recognition, filling your days with distractions that keep the deeper questions at bay. But in those quiet moments when all the noise fades, when you're alone with your thoughts and the comfortable lies you tell yourself crumble, a question emerges that you've been running from your entire life. Why do you feel so fundamentally unprepared for the challenges that others seem to navigate with ease? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, often traces back to the man who was meant to be your first teacher of strength. Your father, present or absent, nurturing or distant, encouraging or critical, became the architect of your inner world long before you understood what was being built within you. A father doesn't simply raise a child. He constructs the very scaffolding of their internal dialogue. Every interaction, every response to your childhood expressions of joy, fear, curiosity, or vulnerability becomes part of the voice that will accompany you into adulthood. This voice becomes your constant companion, the one that whispers encouragement or criticism during moments of uncertainty, the one that either champions your dreams or questions your worthiness to pursue them. For some, this inherited voice becomes a source of unwavering support, an internal cheerleader that says, "You can do this," when external circumstances suggest otherwise. But for many, this voice carries a different tone entirely. It becomes the part of you that hesitates when you should act, that questions your judgment when you should trust it, that expects rejection before you even try. If your father raised you with emotional silence, your internal voice learned to whisper rather than speak boldly. If he responded to your natural exuberance with irritation or dismissal, your voice learned to apologize for taking up space. If he demanded perfection while offering little guidance on how to achieve it, your voice learned to focus on everything you do wrong rather than celebrating what you do right. Consider how profoundly this shapes your relationship with yourself. When you face a challenge, whose standards are you really trying to meet? When you succeed, whose approval are you seeking? When you fail, whose disappointment echoes loudest in your mind? The answers to these questions reveal how deeply your father's emotional blueprint has become integrated into your sense of self. What many people don't understand is that the patterns you developed in response to your father's limitations aren't character flaws. They're sophisticated survival mechanisms. Your developing brain, in its remarkable adaptability, learned to navigate the emotional landscape of your childhood home with impressive precision. If unpredictability was a constant feature of your early years, your nervous system learned to scan for danger even in safe situations. If emotional expression was met with discomfort or anger, your brain learned that showing your true feelings was a threat to your safety. If your needs were consistently secondary to adult concerns, your mind learned that asking for what you want is selfish and dangerous. Modern neuroscience reveals that these early adaptations literally reshape the developing brain. The pathways for stress response, decision-making, and emotional regulation are carved deeper when they're used frequently in childhood. What once protected you from emotional threats in your family system now creates obstacles in adult relationships and personal growth. You might recognize this in your tendency to overthink simple decisions, your difficulty expressing needs directly, or your exhaustion after social interactions that seem effortless for others. These aren't signs of weakness. They're evidence of a mind that learned to work overtime to maintain safety in an environment where emotional threats felt as real as physical ones. As you moved through childhood and into adolescence, you unconsciously absorbed not just your father's spoken lessons, but his unspoken fears. You learned his definitions of strength and weakness, his comfort zones and panic triggers, his strategies for avoiding discomfort, and his methods of maintaining control. If your father never learned to apologize, you absorbed the belief that admitting mistakes is dangerous. If he avoided vulnerable conversations, you learned that emotional intimacy is uncomfortable territory to be navigated around rather than through. If he dealt with stress through silence or anger, These became your default responses to overwhelming situations. Perhaps most significantly, you inherited his relationship with his own potential. If your father lived a life smaller than his capabilities, if he chose security over growth or familiarity over possibility, you learned that shrinking from your potential is normal, even admirable. You mistook his limitations for wisdom and his fears for realism. This inheritance shows up in countless ways throughout your adult life. You might find yourself avoiding opportunities that could lead to growth because they feel dangerously unfamiliar. You might struggle with imposter syndrome, constantly waiting to be exposed as inadequate despite evidence of your competence. You might exhaust yourself trying to be everything to everyone, having learned that your worth must be constantly proven, rather than simply felt. The survival strategies that served you in childhood often become the very obstacles that prevent you from thriving in adulthood. The emotional numbing that protected you from a father's unpredictable moods now prevents you from fully experiencing joy. The hypervigilance that kept you safe from criticism now makes it difficult to relax and be present in relationships. You learned to read rooms with remarkable accuracy, but you never learned to trust your own emotional responses. You became skilled at avoiding conflict, but you never developed the ability to navigate necessary tension. You mastered the art of not being a burden, but you never learned how to ask for support when you genuinely need it. These adaptations allowed you to survive your childhood, but survival and growth require different skills entirely. Survival is about minimizing risk and maintaining the status quo. Growth requires embracing uncertainty and stepping into discomfort. The very mechanisms that kept you safe are now the barriers preventing you from becoming who you're meant to be. Perhaps the most profound way your father shaped your life is through the template he provided for how you relate to yourself. His voice became your inner voice. His standards became your expectations. His emotional availability, or lack thereof, became your comfort level with your own inner world. If your father struggled to express pride in your accomplishments, you learned to downplay your successes and question whether you truly deserve recognition. If he had difficulty with emotional expression, you learned to be suspicious of your own feelings, treating them as inconvenient interruptions rather than valuable information. If your father carried unresolved trauma or disappointment, you may have unconsciously absorbed the responsibility to heal his wounds or fulfill his unrealized dreams. This creates a life where your choices are filtered through someone else's unfinished business rather than your own authentic desires. The journey from inherited limitation to personal freedom begins with a single, often uncomfortable realization. Much of what you've accepted as your personality is actually learned behavior. The voice in your head that questions your worth, the hesitation before taking risks, the exhaustion from constantly managing others' emotions. These aren't inherent character traits. They're adaptations to circumstances that no longer exist. This awareness can feel destabilizing at first. If these patterns aren't truly you, then who are you beneath them? But this discomfort is actually the first sign of growth. It means you're beginning to distinguish between your authentic self and your conditioned responses. Awareness allows you to observe your patterns without immediately acting on them. You begin to notice the moment when your inherited fear whispers that you shouldn't speak up in a meeting. You catch yourself automatically apologizing for things that don't require apologies. You recognize when you're making decisions based on avoiding your father's historical disappointment rather than pursuing your own fulfillment. One of the most challenging but necessary parts of this journey involves developing a more complex understanding of your father. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or minimizing its impact. Rather, it means recognizing that he too was shaped by forces beyond his control. Your father was once a child who learned his own survival strategies. He developed his emotional limitations in response to his circumstances, just as you developed yours. He may have been raised by parents who never taught him how to express love, handle stress, or process difficult emotions. His silence, criticism, or emotional distance may have been the only tools he inherited for navigating the challenges of parenthood. Understanding this doesn't erase the impact of his limitations on your development, but it does something equally important. It helps you see that his patterns don't define what's possible for you. You can choose to break cycles that he never had the awareness or tools to break himself. As you develop awareness of your inherited patterns, you gain the opportunity to become the parent to yourself that you needed. This doesn't happen through dramatic gestures or sudden transformations. Instead, it occurs through countless small moments of choosing a different response. When your inner critic launches into familiar territory, you can practice responding with the compassion you would offer a good friend. When fear whispers that you're not qualified for an opportunity, you can acknowledge the fear while choosing to apply anyway. When you feel the urge to apologize for taking up space, you can pause and ask whether an apology is actually warranted. This process requires patience with yourself. You're essentially rewiring neural pathways that have been reinforced for decades. The old patterns will feel more natural at first because they are more practiced. But each time you choose a different response, you strengthen new pathways while weakening the old ones. As you begin to separate your identity from your inherited patterns, you have the opportunity to develop your own definition of strength. Perhaps your father taught you that strength means never showing vulnerability. You can choose to define strength as the courage to be honest about your struggles. If he taught you that strength means handling everything alone, you can redefine it as the wisdom to ask for help when you need it. True strength isn't the absence of fear, doubt, or struggle. It's the willingness to feel these challenging emotions while continuing to move toward your values and goals. It's the ability to acknowledge your limitations while refusing to let them define your possibilities. Your strength doesn't have to look like your father's strength. In fact, the most powerful thing you can do is develop capacities. He never had emotional intelligence, vulnerability, the ability to apologize and learn from mistakes, the courage to pursue dreams even when success isn't guaranteed. Perhaps the most profound gift you can give yourself and future generations is the commitment to break cycles of inherited limitation. This doesn't require you to become perfect or to never struggle. It simply requires you to develop awareness of your patterns and to make conscious choices rather than unconscious repetitions. When you choose vulnerability over emotional hiding, you're breaking a cycle. When you express your needs directly rather than hoping others will guess, you're breaking a cycle. When you pursue opportunities that excite you, even though they feel uncertain, you're breaking a cycle. Each of these choices creates new possibilities, not just for your own life, but for the lives of those who will observe and learn from your example. You become a link in the chain of human development that chooses growth over safety, authenticity over approval, and courage over comfort. The process of separating your identity from your inherited patterns isn't a destination, but a lifelong practice. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, when familiar fears feel overwhelming, when you find yourself responding in ways that mirror your father's limitations. These moments aren't failures, they're information. They show you where more healing is needed, where more awareness is required, where more compassion for yourself is called for. Each time you notice these patterns without judgment and choose a different response, you strengthen your capacity for conscious living. The voice in your head may always carry some echo of your father's limitations, but it doesn't have to be the loudest voice. You can cultivate other voices, the voice of wisdom, the voice of courage, the voice of self-compassion. Over time, these new voices can become stronger and more familiar than the inherited ones. The most beautiful realization in this entire process is that your story doesn't end with the patterns you inherited. Every day offers new opportunities to write different chapters, to make different choices, to become someone your father perhaps never had the tools to become himself. You are not bound by his limitations, his fears, or his unhealed wounds. You are not required to carry forward his emotional burdens, or to live within the boundaries of his comfort zone. You have the power to expand beyond what was modeled for you, to heal what was passed down broken, and to create new possibilities that didn't exist in the generation before you. This isn't about rejecting your father, or minimizing everything positive he may have contributed to your life. It's about claiming your right to become fully yourself. Not the version of you that adapted to his limitations, but the version that reflects your true potential. As you continue this journey of distinguishing between your inherited patterns and your authentic self, you'll begin to discover a strength that feels different from anything you've experienced before. It's not the strength of invulnerability or control. It's not the strength of never needing help or never showing emotion. It's the strength of knowing yourself clearly, accepting yourself completely, and choosing your responses consciously. It's the strength of being able to feel difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It's the strength of being able to ask for what you need without shame, and to offer what you can without resentment. This strength allows you to be present in your relationships, rather than managing them from a place of fear. It allows you to take creative risks because your worth isn't dependent on always succeeding. It allows you to rest without guilt, and to celebrate your accomplishments without waiting for external validation. As you continue to heal inherited patterns and develop conscious ways of being, Your growth creates ripples that extend far beyond your individual life. Others begin to feel safer expressing their authenticity around you. Your children, if you have them, learn different patterns from the ones you inherited. Your relationships become more genuine, because you're relating from your true self rather than your protective adaptations. You become a person who breaks cycles rather than perpetuating them, who creates safety rather than requiring others to manage your emotions, who models conscious living rather than unconscious reaction. This is perhaps the greatest gift you can offer the world. Your commitment to becoming more conscious, more authentic, and more whole. What you once interpreted as weakness was actually the beginning of strength. The sensitivity that felt like vulnerability was actually wisdom. The questions that felt like doubt were actually intelligence. The struggles that felt like failure were actually the raw materials for transformation. Your father's limitations don't define your possibilities. His fears don't determine your future. His inability to guide you in certain areas doesn't prevent you from learning those skills now. You have the rest of your life to become the person you were meant to be before inherited patterns convinced you to become smaller. The journey from inherited limitation to conscious living is not always comfortable, but it is always worth it. Every step you take toward greater awareness and authenticity creates more space for joy, connection, and fulfillment in your life. Every pattern you heal prevents it from being passed to the next generation. Every conscious choice you make contributes to the evolution of human consciousness itself. Your strength is not just beginning to unfold. It has been waiting your entire life for this moment of recognition and choice. The weight you never agreed to carry can finally be set down. The story that didn't start with you can be transformed by you. The limitations you inherited can end with you. And in that transformation, you discover that what felt like your greatest weakness was actually pointing toward your greatest strength all along.